welcome to Just One Thing for Parents. I'm Bettina Honan. Anne Powers is a psychotherapist who has written extensively about attachment theory, and I interviewed her on my podcast today. She particularly talks about how early attachment styles influence our adult relationships. And in this episode, she focuses on two key attachment behaviours, caregiving and care seeking. I think we often know about caregiving. We don't often talk enough about care seeking. But what I really love about this episode is how she breaks down the key elements of those two attachment behaviours, care seeking and caregiving, with examples of what it might look like in each attachment style. So it gives parents a really clear guide as to what they need to do in order to give their child a secure attachment. We also talk about how our own attachment styles impact our adult relationships, how to become more aware of your own pattern, and what you can do to be more present with your child to give them a secure attachment. This theory, written by John Bowlby, and how she explains it, are just so helpful to know how to change the patterns from our own childhood, if you want to build a legacy of security. So please keep listening to my episode with Anne Powers. So hello, Anne, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Bettina.
So the question for you is, caregiving and care seeking are skills. How can parents learn them, and why are these so central to attachment? And perhaps you could start by just saying a little bit about why you chose this as a question.
Thank you. Well, I'm really happy to be able to have this space for thinking about this, because caregiving is the absolutely key method by which we create the attachment bond and by which we pass on to our children the attachment style that they're going to grow up with. So I think people listening probably are familiar with the idea of transgenerational transmission of trauma, but of course, transgenerational transmission of secure attachment as well. And it's through our caregiving that we do that. We pass on we're likely to pass on the same, should we say, quality of attachment that we had. But by the fact that people are listening to this podcast, they're hoping to break the chain and pass on something better to their children. So that's wonderful. And so I'd love to speak to that aim and longing in parents to do better for their children than they received.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose we should maybe just fill in a little bit. A lot of people will understand the word attachment, but perhaps just say a little bit about John Bowlby and attachment and what a secure attachment is.
Thank you. I'd love to reference John Bowlby. So it's about 100 years ago, he began to develop what we now call attachment theory. And he'd come from a psychoanalytic background, so he moved amongst other colleagues who were very concerned about the internal world. But Bowlby saw that what happens on the outside is so important to the formation of the psyche. And he became very interested in ethnology, the study of animal behavior and mammals. And he held a great regard for Darwin and evolution. And his theory explains how every human baby, to some degree, perhaps mammals, but we're going with human babies, learns to adapt to its caregiver in order to get the best care it can. So survival of the species requires that the baby get looked after by its caregivers, at least one parent, let's say. And in order to get the best care from the caregiver I have, very, very young, from day one, I'm learning to be the right kind of baby for my household. Mm-hmm. So if my parents are not really comfortable with their feelings or with vulnerability, and in attachment theory, we call this avoidant, if that's the case, the baby from day one begins to pick up, I can get looked after, I can get fed and held, and broadly I can get the care I need, provided I don't cry or make a fuss or do anything that makes my parents feel vulnerable or puts them in touch with their own vulnerable feelings. Of course, the baby can't cognitively do all that, but it picks it up. And that's why at 13 months, researchers can measure the attachment style of a baby accurately. And that will in about 70% of cases, that will go with the child. Mm. So this is the way that the baby adapts to the parent. And then attachment theory understands that inside all of us, we develop, they call it internal working models. which is a sense of self and a sense of other. So that family I described, where the baby perhaps grew up to be avoidant, they have a sense of themselves. I cope alone. I have to cope alone. And they have a sense of the other. The other doesn't really want to know much about me. In a secure family, the baby develops a sense, I am lovable. And the other person, my mother, wants to help me. And you can see what a difference it would make to the care seeking. The secure baby believes the mother wants to help. But let's say the secure child, or even the secure teenager, or the secure adult, they believe that their partner, their mother, wants to help. And so their way of approaching for help is so different from an avoidant or an anxious child. So I didn't mention anxious, but anxiously attached happens when parents have been, all these parents are doing their best, but the anxious parents are intermittently available. So the child develops an understanding that if I make a bit of a fuss, I'll get looked after. But if I don't make a fuss, there'll be nothing there for me. So they learn to sort of be coming towards and demanding.
So what you're saying is that from a very, very early age, before we have language, before we have conscious thought at all, babies change what behavior they bring to the parents depending on what they think the parents can tolerate. That's really quite astounding, isn't it?
Yes. And I like what you say, according to what the parents can tolerate, because that's such a high level understanding, but babies have it.
Yeah. So if a baby picks up early on, my parent can't really cope with things when I'm sad or when I'm angry, they stop taking the anger or sadness towards them. Yeah. It's quite amazing, isn't it? Us human beings, how we've adapted over evolution. Because as you say, what's most important for the baby is that they're with a caregiver who feeds them and who looks after them. And if they have to change who they are in order to stay in that relationship with that person, that's what babies do.
That's what they do. And I'll mention another element that Bowlby identified early on, because he really did want to root this in science. It wasn't just let's have theories, it was science. And he identified 5, they're called species-specific behaviours. So all species, if you take sticklebacks or blackbirds, they'll have species-specific behaviours, for example, the way they mate. And the creature grows up knowing this, so that when the time comes, it knows what to do. And the species-specific behaviours that Bowlby found in humans are, let's hope I can get them all straight off, sucking, crying, smiling, clinging, and following. And all babies can do those. And it's the way they start their care seeking. Of course, we see that sort of the tail end of those still in adults. We see they still exist in us in some form.
So just before we go on to think about the question, just to clarify for people, we're aiming for a secure attachment, which means that we know that we can come and go freely and we trust the caregiver. But some people are avoidant. I loved the way you put it in your TED talk. I think, what was it, the way you said it in your TED talk? Avoidant group keep things under
wraps.
Under wraps.
Yeah.
So they
and the anxious ones amplify it. They kind of blow it out of the water.
Yeah. That's such an amazing way of helping us understand people's behavior. So if you're with somebody or you have a child who keeps everything to themselves and doesn't give you things, the chances are there's maybe some avoidant attachment there. And if there's somebody who puts everything out on the table and they're very anxious and give you everything, then there's maybe some anxious attachment. And obviously every parent is doing their best. Every experience of parenting is imperfect. But what you're saying is that we tend to pass on these patterns unless we can be aware of them and try to change them. Is that right?
Yes. And I so want to salute parents who did not have a secure upbringing, but are doing their best here. And I'm such a believer in the value of repair. And it really is all right to get things wrong. But if we are able to come back to the child and own where we made our mistakes, that is something.
Amazing. Okay, so caregiving and care seeking are skills. How can parents learn them? Maybe we can move on to think about that.
Yes. So I think let's go with caregiving first, because that's the parent's main role in relation to the child, and the child is seeking care. Yes, that's how it should be, because the parent is the attachment figure and the child is the one who needs care. There are some families where things get very troubled and the child becomes a parentified child. They actually look after their parents, and we probably all know families where this has happened, and that's very difficult. That means the parent is really, really struggling, and the child steps up and takes the reins. They may not be driving the car, but they are emotionally holding things together, looking after their mother or father. I think of caregiving as an umbrella skill, and it helps to break it down into 5 elements. And so that we can think about how are we doing in each of those. So the very basic one is, how available and accessible am I to my child? A key of secure attachment is that the parents are available, responsive, and reliable. As the absolute planks of secure attachment. So how available am I to my child? Is the baby placed in a pram at the bottom of the garden, so I'm not even going to know if they do cry?
Right.
That would be not available. That was, we hope, the old days. Most people don't have that big a garden, but once upon a time that was a method in England. That's the first thing. The second thing is how well I do at picking up signals. So if my child, who's normally quite chatty, is very quiet at a meal, I might pick up a signal. That's great. The third thing is how I interpret that signal. So this is quite a cognitive function, what sense I make of the signal. The fourth thing is the action, the thing I do, having realized that something's wrong, having interpreted what it might mean. What action do I take? And some parents are more able, they're better equipped for being sensitive and attuned in the actual action of picking up the baby, let's say, whether it's done gently in a tentative way to listen to what's happening, or whether it's done in a rather sort of business-like mechanical way. Let's get this baby out and we'll assume it's the nappy. Yeah. And then fifthly is how reliable we can be in delivering all of those. If it's all right, what I think I'd like to do is mention how those 5 look in the 4 types of attachment. So that's secure, avoidant, anxious, and disorganized.
We haven't mentioned disorganized yet.
We haven't. I think I should just very quickly say disorganized attachment happens in families that are really struggling, where the parents have probably in their own lives been traumatized. And so they're really emotionally a bit all over the place. And the baby and child have an experience of their parent as actually frightening. The parent may be violent, for example, or they may have an experience of the parent as frightened themselves. So the parent is a very frightened person because fear is contagious. So the baby can pick it up that way. If the parent is, for example, violent, let's say we've got a 6-year-old child and they're in the park and a dog really frightens them. Do they run towards the parent because they are frightened and the parent's the only person they've got? But on the other hand, the parent is someone from whom they actually want to run anyway, because they know from history that if they run up to their parent, depending on the state the parent's in, the parent, disorganized parent, may occasionally be able to do the really loving thing, but sometimes they might completely blank the child, which is very disturbing, or they could be violent if that's what they've also experienced in their own life. So disorganized attachment is a particularly deep wound. So thinking about those 5 elements, being accessible. So let's start with secure. So in a secure family, the parents do manage to, they've given the child the message, I am available. If you've got a trouble, you can come to me. When it comes to signals, they're alert, but not hyper alert. They're not constantly, I'll have to ring up the teacher in case my child's upset. They're not hyper alert. They're just listening appropriately for signals. In terms of interpreting, they do pretty well, because when their child cries, they don't panic. They feel the empathy, they attune, but they're able to keep their cognitive brain on board because they're not overly disturbed. So they're pretty well equipped for interpreting. When it comes to delivering the care, they're more likely to be sensitive and attuned, whatever age, whether we're talking babies or teenagers. And they can be curious and working out what's wrong. And in terms of reliability, they can be very, very steady. So that's the secure parents. They have the great blessing that they have secure attachment. Mm. Many of us didn't have that blessing, and I do speak for myself. If we're avoidantly attached as a parent, then we're the ones who probably would feel a bit inclined to put the baby at the bottom of the garden, because once the baby's been fed and watered, really we'd like them to sleep for 2 or 3 hours and then we can get on with things. I mean, everyone would like that. The avoidant parent might be more inclined to expect it, and the baby learns that. Mm. In terms of signals, avoidant parents themselves, they've had a very rough journey and they can be hypervigilant. So it's not that they don't notice signals, but they then might kind of say, well, tough, the baby's crying. It's, let's leave it for a bit. So they might be a bit willing to ignore them. When it comes to interpreting, they're going to interpret it with their avoidant lens. So they learned you're not meant to make a fuss. So when the baby cries or the toddler cries, it's like, well stop whining. Mm. That would be a tendency to interpret as they only want attention. Mm. That's the kind of angle that an avoidant parent might take. And when it comes to delivering the care, they would tend to be on the brusque side. It's not that avoidant parents don't love their children or do lots of good things for them. They prefer giving what we call instrumental care. So they'll do things. They'll drive the children around. They might even help them get the homework done for them, something like that. When it comes to the more emotionally available tasks of listening and empathizing with troubles around friends at school or whatever else, that's where they tend to get impatient and say, come on, grow up. And in terms of reliability, the avoidant parent is very reliable, but they are reliably not available in an emotional sense.
Right.
And then if we think of a parent who is themselves anxiously attached, they probably will be available, but it might actually be a bit too much. They're tending to be the hovering helicopter parent. When we think of picking up the signal, they'll be right on it. But again, a bit too, the baby squeaked, I better pick them up. Interpreting the signal, they're going to have trouble because their own wounds are often flooding around. And sometimes they muddle up their own distress with their child's. Mm. So the child is a little bit upset about a friend in school. The parent got bullied in school, and now they start exaggerating what's going on with the child because they're so keen that their child not experience the same. Mm-hmm. When it comes to delivering the care, the anxious parent will sometimes be just lovely, really attuned and responsive. But these are the parents who are intermittent for different reasons. It could be depression, just things in their own story that make them be sometimes really available, warm and responsive, and other times they're not there. The caregiving will be on, off, and the child doesn't really know which one they'll get. So when it comes to reliability, that's the same story. It's really difficult for them to be reliable. For the parents with disorganization in their background who are disorganized, I was sort of almost hesitating how to voice it, because if we came to parenting in what I would call a fully disorganized state without having had the chance for some repair, it will be incredibly hard, just incredibly hard for the parent and for the baby. But they really struggle with all five. In terms of being available, no, it's just not, they're not available to themselves. Sometimes they switch off, freeze. Sometimes they have fugues when they lose time and don't know where they are. This is people with deep trauma. Picking up signals, it'll be random. They'll sometimes pick them up and sometimes won't. Interpreting, they really have on very shaky ground for interpreting because they're flooded with their own trauma. So they will project feelings onto the child. This is where sometimes very troubled parents will look at the baby who's distressed, and they'll say, "Why are you looking at me like that?" It's like they think the baby is accusing them of being a bad parent.
So when you say project, that's basically they put a feeling onto the baby that the baby is not giving them. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to make that sound too rare. I mean, many parents will at times when if they're most distressed will do a bit of projecting, but for someone who's disorganized it could be quite a serious level. That's sort of like a baby and they're saying you're just doing it to annoy me, or he just does it to annoy. So interpreting they can't do. In terms of delivering care, well, it'll entirely depend on what state the disorganized person is in, whether they're sort of live at their best, they're sort of in touch with themselves, they could do reasonable care, but often they've lost contact with themselves and they're in sort of subsumed in past trauma. And finally, reliability, no, they won't be reliable. The child doesn't know which parent they're going to get.
Okay.
And those are the children who don't know, do I run towards them because they can offer some comfort, or do I run away because actually they're a threat to me?
Yeah. And I suppose inherent in what you were saying is this is parents, as we've said, adapted as a child, taking into account what their parents could tolerate. And then unless we reflect on this, we are likely to go on and give the same thing to our child. And also we take these adaptations into our adult relationships as well, don't we?
Definitely. It's absolutely, caregiving and care seeking are key parts of an adult couple. And yes, you summed it up really well there. I suppose the thing I would add, reflecting, you said, unless we've had a chance to reflect, that helps enormously. But I think for most people, they need, because reflecting is a kind of ultimately a cognitive function. It's recognizing that adding two and two together is so important. But actually, where there are wounds, there needs to be some healing. So some kind of emotional space, but ideally, emotional space for healing.
Yeah. Because it's not inevitable that we pass these patterns on, is it? We can absolutely change our attachment relationships, but it's hard work.
It's really hard work. But I do think perhaps we are fortunate that there is now this sort of whole, I mean, you could call it an industry, but this arena where that there is a place to learn and there is an understanding that we need to learn. That is more clear than it once was.
So I love the framework that you've given, and I think people can take those 5 things, the 5 different, what would you call them? 5 different.
Well, they're like behaviors. Skills within the whole caregiving skill. Yeah. These are 5 elements.
Amazing. And I think you've given some lovely examples of where it can go wrong and what we're aiming for in terms of the secure attachment.
In terms of what we can do, so reflecting is great, and we're helped to reflect by things like this podcast, we hope, by reading, but we also need, I think we need first aid tools for those times we are triggered, because it will be certain moments we get triggered. And reflecting comes in again because it's identifying when those things happen. So we may find we're worse when we're in the car. We're worse when we're at our parents'. We're worse when we haven't slept, of course. But there may be some structural things we can do, like when we go to our parents, trying to make sure that someone else, like whether it's a sibling or a partner or someone else is there, or there may be some way we can structure that differently. And being in the car, again, there may be ways we can structure it by deciding we don't have conversation in the car, we have music. I don't know, that came off the top of my head. It wasn't very good. I think people can be more imaginative, but there are some structural things we can sometimes do that help.
Changing the environment.
Thank you, changing the environment.
Changing the environment,
And then in terms of first aid, there are things we can practice when we're outside the emergency. So for me, it's breathing, breath work. And there's lots of ways on YouTube or all sorts of places one can learn ways to manage eruptions of feeling in the self so that we don't unload them on our children. But that has to be practiced in a quiet moment by ourselves so that we can draw on it in the emergency.
Yeah. Breathing is actually a kind of superpower that I think people don't realize they have. I'm sure I've said this on this podcast before, but this very simple idea that if you breathe out for longer than you breathe in, your lungs tell your brain things are not as scary as they think they are. It calms your nervous system. And it's a really magical little thing you can say when you're feeling that fight or flight reaction or trigger is just to say, okay, I'm going to breathe in for 4 and out for 6. Do that 4 times and you will feel calmer.
I love how you put it so simply. Just breathe out more slowly, and our lungs tell our brain we're safer than we think.
Yeah.
So that is a wonderful thing. We would be helping our children so much.
Yeah.
There is also the underlying emotional bit. Ideally, we will find some routes, and for those who can afford it with money, but also time, therapy is the right therapy is really can be such a healing space where we get to grieve for what we didn't have so that we can be more available to our children.
Yeah.
But if we can't afford therapy, if that's not an option, there are really a lot of self-help groups. Most 12-step groups can be very helpful in this way. I also think practices like internal family systems, that can be done as therapy, but it can be done as a self-practice, IFS.
Yeah.
Also, another acronym, NVC, nonviolent communication. This is like a thing you can learn in groups or just online or in a book, where we learn to identify how to speak with observations, feelings, needs, and boundaries. It teaches. It teaches us, but we get in touch with our own struggle around the feelings, and then journaling can help us manage some of those difficult feelings.
So the first thing is being brave enough to admit, maybe I struggle in this way. What is my attachment style? Maybe I have some difficulties. Then what you're saying is change the environment where you can and use some of these brilliant tools that you're talking about in order to do this self-reflection and help make sense of it and change the way in which you respond, which is hard because we're changing brain circuits essentially that were fixed very early on.
Yes.
So maybe we could just end. I know we're going way over our 20 minutes, but it's so interesting. And just say a little about care seeking, because I think we don't talk about care seeking enough.
Lovely. So care seeking it also breaks down into 5 elements, which we can notice in us very much in ourselves and in our children and in our partners. The way we manage these 5 sub skills all depends on our attachment pattern again. But the 5 things are, firstly, the idea we have of self and other. So if I believe I'm lovable and my parent loves me, then that's going to go very well. It's not as easy. So that's the first element. The next element is making, we call it a bid for help. So how do we do? Are we able to go to our parent and say, I'm really upset, I've fallen out with my friend? Or if we're more avoidant, we'll probably just say nothing. But maybe they'll notice we're a bit quieter than usual. If we're anxious, the care seeking tends to, the bid for help often comes out as a bit critical. So in adults, it might be, why are you always on your phone?
Right.
That would be the sort of anxious person's bid for help. So there's how we feel about self and other. It's the way we make the bid. It's the way we show our feelings around the distress. So are we able to show, if we're sad about something like we've fallen out with a friend, can we show that to the parent? The avoidant child can't show it. It's can we explain the problem? The next one is, can we explain the problem with an appropriate amount of detail, which a secure person can. The avoidant person, if they told about a problem at all, they might just say, oh, I got a bit upset with Jenny today, or something. Whereas the anxious child might tell such a big and complicated story that the parent actually has trouble working out what's the real problem here.
Right.
And then the final of the 5 is, to what degree can the person seeking care really take it in? So an avoidant person might be very upset and they might actually wish there was going to be some comfort, but it's very difficult for them to really receive it when it comes towards them. So in adults, that would amount to somebody, they are really upset because a friend has died. And when someone offers them compassion, they go, oh, well, we're all going to die one day or something. Mm-hmm. They push it away. We see it. I think one of the clearest examples is we look at the secure and the anxious toddler. The secure toddler, if they're distressed, the parent picks them up and they mold into the parent's body so that they get ventral contact. And then the chemicals start flowing, probably oxytocin, good chemicals, give them a calming, safe feeling. For the anxious child, they'll cry and cry to be picked up because they're often asking, they always want to know they've got their parents' attention. The parent picks them up, but they arch away and they're still crying. They've been picked up, but they're still crying. And there's a very good reason that they know that if they calm, their parent may stop attending to them. Right. So they just keep on crying, which means they can't even receive the soothing. So it's a very painful bind they're in.
Wow. So can you just say the 5 for care seeking as well?
Yeah. So the first one is about the view of self and view of other.
Mm-hmm.
Do I believe I'll get the care? The next is the way we make the bid. Can we be clear, but not blaming in asking for help? The third one is, can we show the appropriate feelings so that the caregiver really, really picks up appropriately how upset we are? And the next one is, can we rationally explain the problem so they know what's going on? And then the fifth one is, can we receive that care?
Amazing. And when you think about those things, we see how that has an impact on our adult relationships. I know you've worked a lot with couples.
Massively, yeah.
And we can see, with a partner, if you're struggling with something, how do you go and say, I need your help? Or do you shut that down? Or do you just get irritated when you need something? It's happening for all of us, isn't it? These difficulties.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
And I think learning to be a good caregiver or good care seeker, it absolutely benefits the parent-child relationship, but also the parent-parent. And that's win-win, because if we can get more support from our partner, we can be more support to our child.
Yeah. And often it can be helpful if your child is struggling, if you're struggling, to think about what's going on with your couple, with the partner, with the co-parent first, before you think about what's happening with the child, can't it? Is that something
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely, because in families, we know that can happen. It becomes one child begins to carry troubles for the family, which really needed working out between the parents.
Thank you so much, Anne. So if we could end, I wonder if you could end by just saying, if there's just one thing you could say to parents about caregiving and care seeking, in terms of how they can use this information to help them and their child to try to increase the chances of a secure attachment, what would it be?
I think it would be, can we be compassionate with ourselves first, with ourselves? Because when we feel someone is compassionate towards us, so in our relationship with ourselves, we feel safer. And when we're safer, we can learn better and we can do better.
That's wonderful. I can really recommend Anne's TED Talk. It's really exceptional and so clear. Thank you so much for sharing your information and knowledge today. It's going to be so helpful for so many parents.
Thank you very much, Bettina.